Hey, what's going on everybody? Justin here, and in this video I just want to do a kind of a quick non-fiction recommendation video from a book, a non-fiction book that I really enjoyed from each month of the year so far, January through October, to give me a total of 10. Not necessarily my favorite books per se, but just really good non-fiction books that I think other people will like as well. And I'm just going to go ahead and get started, because if I don't start right now, this video is just going to start like rambling on to like an hour long, and no one wants that. So let's just go ahead and start with January's pick. And we have Mammals, a very short introduction by T.S. Kemp. And if you follow this channel at all, which, if you made it this far to the video, you might as well like and subscribe and whatnot down below. But anyways, I really enjoy these very short introductions for the most part. And this year I've done pretty good. I'm on pace to read one for each month of the year, which, I just think is kind of a neat little hobby. Is that a hobby? I guess neat little goal, I guess, for my reading, because I never actually hit it. I always say I'm going to the beginning of the year, and then I never do. But anyways, I thought this was just kind of a really cool take on, just focusing in on the mammals, and sort of the way he kind of categorizes the different chapters of the different, kind of goes through the different orders of animals based on sort of how they get around and like kind of their like locomotive capabilities. We got like bats that are flying mammals, we got cetaceans that are, underwater swimming mammals essentially. And then we also have like, burrowing underground mammals, ones that are kind of more arboreal, things like that. Which I thought was kind of a neat little take, and you kind of like learn a lot, puts a lot of things into perspective. There's only 5,000 or so species of mammals, which kind of, puts us on par with like reptiles. I mean, birds I think have like 10 or 11,000. If we're dealing with like the other like phyla, like, arthropods, there's like a bazillion mollusks, there's like a 89 gazillion insects and things. But he definitely makes a case of why mammals are actually like really cool, and why sort of mammals do dominate kind of the planet at this point in time. Obviously, like the dinosaurs and reptiles dominated in earlier eras and whatnot. But basically, just with our really high energy expenditure, we are able to take on like so many different like varied and diverse forms. Like I was saying, like kind of just even the way we get around. There's just so many different variations of like kind of the mammal body plan that you can't really pigeonhole any of them into like anything. So I thought it was kind of just a neat kind of take on mammals. If you like animals and stuff, I think you'll definitely enjoy this book. And especially if you haven't read like kind of animal books before, a very short introduction book would probably be a good way to start, because it's like I said, it's only about 120 pages or something like that to kind of get you started in the right direction. Also, going on to February, I do have my little paper here, just because for the ones I don't have, a lot of nonfiction books have really long subtitles. So for February, we have Metazoa, Animal Life and the Birth of the Mind. And this is by Peter Godfrey Smith. And if you want to take a trip down memory lane, if I could find where I put the book, I reviewed one of his earlier works, Other Minds, The Octopus, the Sea, and the Deep Origins of Consciousness, way back, I think, in the first year I did BookTube. So if you want to go make fun of one of my earlier videos, I'll put it like right there for you, for your pleasure. But anyways, Metazoa is all about sort of, it's a combination of philosophy and science on sort of, the development of consciousness and the mind. What is the mind? What is consciousness? All that kind of like, big question sort of stuff. We sort of deal with the evolution of life, kind of dealing with sort of the earlier ancestors of life, dealing with like single-celled organisms and very simple, primitive, quote-unquote primitive life or whatever, but dealing how they sense the world, like the different sensory apparatuses that were available, and how they kind of evolved over time, kind of developing to more like, complex things that could do more cognitive functions, as you go from a single cell to like a multicellular or organism with different organs and things like that. And sort of at what point do you cross the line from just, sensing and perceiving different like data about the world to having a mind, to having a conscious, was there actually like a threshold that was crossed, things like that. But even though it is fairly academic, we're dealing with pretty highbrow stuff here. It was interesting because like the author definitely puts his cards on the table and kind of says, this is kind of like the camp I follow, but this is like, there's this argument, and here's like the pros and cons of like everything. And it's just kind of neat because these questions are always going to be sort of like asked, where there's not going to be like a hard and fast rule, things like that. But the prose is actually very well done as well. He's an avid scuba diver, and a lot of like the content for this book was actually like anecdotes from his scuba diving, like observing different octopuses and stuff, and that's also included in this one as well. So it's still actually very well written, and that's why I think if you want to kind of deal with the topic of when does consciousness emerge in the evolutionary history of life, definitely check out that one. All right, next up we have March The Storm Before the Storm by Mike Duncan. And if you don't know who Mike Duncan is, he is the creator of the History of Rome podcast, one of the most successful podcasts I think like ever created. And then he's like, I'm going to write a book, on Roman history, since he's, got the Roman history podcast and stuff. But this one was interesting because it takes place a couple of generations before the fall of the Republic, kind of the era of like the triumvirs and, Mark Antony and Octavian and stuff. They get quite a bit of coverage, to be honest. There's like a lot of books on that. This book actually takes place a generation or two, actually more like 2 or 3 generations kind of before that era, starting with the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, which would have been around, the 130s BCE, down to the time of Marius and Sulla, which would have been around 80 BCE or so. So we got about 50 years there, and this is sort of the real heavy transitionary period, during the Roman Republic. The couple generations before that, Rome starts conquering the entire Mediterranean, but they're still just a city-state republic, and they almost don't have the mechanisms kind of to cope with actually managing the structure that the Roman Republic became. So dealing sort of with the reforms that the Gracchi brothers tried to make, and unfortunately really weren't able to get too much accomplished there before they were pretty much murdered. You kind of dealing with the social war between Rome and the Italian allies in around 90 BCE, kind of what the causes were for that and the outcomes, stuff like that. Marius is 6 or 7 consulships, Sulla marching in on Rome, becoming dictator, his pogroms and everything like that. This sort of set the stage for the warlords of the triumvirate and stuff. Pompey himself was one of Sulla's primary lieutenants and everything. Kind of just sets the stage for them to kind of do what they did and kind of get away with it without as much resistance as there probably could have been, just because all this stuff has sort of been happening quite a bit the generations before. And like I said, they just don't get as much coverage as the actual fall of the Republic gets. So definitely check that one out if you're into Roman history. Okay, next up we have April. And for April, I had a really awesome read here with David Attenborough's Life on Earth. He had a trilogy of books here, Life on Earth, The Living Planet, and then there is a third one, but I'm actually drawing a blank with it for some reason. But anyways, this one was definitely a treat because I listened to the audiobook version as I read it and kind of looked at the photographs and everything. And that's because David Attenborough himself narrates this particular title. So I thought that was just really cool. If you like nature documentaries, you've obviously heard of David Attenborough and stuff. And I've enjoyed his other works. Obviously, I enjoy his film and narration and all that kind of stuff. So it was really cool, listening to him talk and read the book as I could peruse all the really cool pictures and stuff, and really high quality, kind of Nat Geo level photographs and whatnot. And this book is also just about sort of the kind of the big picture of history of life on Earth, just evolutionary speaking, kind of all the big phyla and orders coming into existence and what was kind of going on, and the different kind of groups of animals that have lived and died over the past several ages of the Earth. Just if you've never actually studied anything kind of like that, this would be a really good book to kind of get started. Plus, if you listen to the audiobook, you have David Attenborough's narration. I don't really know if you can beat that. Alright, and now I think we're up with May. We have Still Life with Brook, Trout by John Girac. And this is actually a really kind of strange read for me because John Girac is known as basically the genre of fish stories or fisherman tales or something. I'm sure there's probably an actual name for the genre and whatnot. So I was a little apprehensive. I just seen so many of his books just floating around all the time. But I'm really, really glad I picked this one up. What he does is he definitely tells sort of fishing tales. Each chapter sort of one of his little adventures. And actually I was kind of pleased because I think the second chapter was his trip to Maine, about 2-3 hours from where I live and stuff. So it's kind of neat when he's dealing with the conversations with the different Maine guides that he's working with, and I can just totally picture people that I'm around acting that way. So anyways, he combines philosophy and kind of just his different takes and views on life, and he's just a really good observer of human nature, and he incorporates that into his fishing stories, just his thoughts on why things are done a certain way, and maybe they should be different, and why he thinks they should be different, and what he's seen and not seen, and all that kind of cool stuff. I just thought it was really well written. There is sort of a kind of a back story arc kind of hidden in the background the whole time too. where he lives in the Midwest, there was a bunch of droughts, and there was, at the time when this was written, like several years ago, there was a bunch of kind of like water usage problems and things like that, and different reforms needed to be made and everything like that, and that all kind of comes together towards at the end. So I thought that was actually kind of a neat little take as well. But like I said, I'm actually really pleased I picked this one up and read it. Really enjoyed it. I picked up 2 more of his works since then. That's how much I enjoyed it, and like I said, I was kind of skeptical in the first place, but just ended up really liking it. Alright, if you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. If you want to support the channel, definitely check out my Etsy shop where I sell little like signs and things like this. Got some philosophy ones, nature ones, stuff like that. Even just liking the shop or liking some items down on Etsy definitely helps out and supports the channel in a really big way. So thank you so much. Now on to the second half of the recommendations. Okay, so now we're moving on to June, and we have Improbable Destinies, Fate, Chance, and the Future of Evolution by Jonathan Losos. And to be honest, I honestly picked this book up just because of the cover. I thought like the Victorian art was just like really awesome, so that's kind of what I picked it up for. And I wasn't 100% sure what was going to be in it, but what the author does is deal really heavily with sort of what is convergent evolution and divergent evolution. And convergent evolution is mostly when different animals just over evolutionary time converge on a single sort of mode of life or body plan. For example, sharks and bone fishes aren't really closely related at all. Mammals are more closely related to pretty much any like bony fish than a bony fish is to a shark, which is just kind of like weird, but definitely true. But why are sharks and like, swordfish or whatever have pretty much the same body plan, for example? And that's because with convergent evolution, he kind of argues, not everything can kind of just go off willy-nilly, and natural selection will sort of bottleneck things and force things into like certain types. However, he also kind of goes off with divergent evolution, where even if you have the same, if you could do a lab experiment over like, a giant like ecosystem or the whole Earth or whatever, if you roll the dice every single time, if we got to repeat, the whole history of Earth, is it going to replay exactly the same or even similar to like the same? And he argues, like divergent evolution is going to show that it's going to be like pretty much completely wildly different as well. So he's got like 2 kind of like competing like arguments that are almost like kind of mutually exclusive, but then he shows how like, how they kind of combine, and it's like kind of like give and take with both of them. I thought it was really well done. Just his writing style is very good. He is like a practical researcher where he studies lizards down in like kind of the tropical islands and things down in like the Bahamas and things like that, and kind of dealing with just real-time evolution of like the divergence of different like lizard groups and stuff. He kind of gets into the nitty-gritty with that as well, so it's kind of cool like seeing a bunch of like real-time, just over like several decades and generations, like things that they've been able to observe. Just highly recommended if you like kind of like your field science with sort of your just like kind of big picture science in one book. Moving on to July, we actually have another Roman history book, and this one is Scipio Africanus, Greater Than Napoleon by B.H. Littlehart. And book is actually, I think, like 80 or 90 years old. If you know me at all, like I really love reading about the Punic Wars, and for some reason, I've never read this book, even though I think it's the only English biography of Scipio Africanus just like out there. And I'm not gonna lie, it is almost sort of like one of those like just like, I don't know, over the top avid, like just like I don't know what you'd even call it, just gushing like love letters to like Scipio. This is sort of like in the era of like British historiography, where you have like the big men or the great men of history or whatever. And, Scipio Africanus is one of the greatest like Roman generals like ever, who defeated Hannibal. He's obviously up there, even though Hannibal gets like I wouldn't say a zillion books, but he gets a lot more books in study than Scipio Africanus does. And so it's kind of neat, just, like I said, it's just almost just for the, I don't know how you explain it, just for like the experience of reading, like, I want to say it was written in between World War I and World War II. Like, you kind of get that like kind of really posh British sort of, I don't know, exceptionalism like writing. I don't even know how to explain it. I knew that going into it, but I still like really enjoyed it. So if you like that sort of thing, if you like Roman history, definitely pick this one up as well. Okay, so now moving on to some of my more recent reads, we've got Planet Walker by John Francis. 17 years of silence, 22 years of walking. And as the subtitle suggests, this man did exactly that. After he saw kind of an oil spill disaster out in California in the 70s, John Francis decided he's going to start, just walking everywhere. as a way to kind of protest against the use of so much like fossil fuel like consumption and things like that. And the silence part comes in is after like a couple years of doing this, you know, he got kind of tired of just like arguing with people because people were just like, you know, you're just trying to be better than us and so on. He said, you know, I'm just gonna take a day off and not talk to anyone. It was on his birthday. He decided he's just gonna be silent and just kind of like enjoy the, you know, peace and quiet basically. But he enjoyed it so much that he kept doing it for like a little while, a couple weeks, a couple months, and then eventually it turned into like a year, and then, you know, it just became like a thing with him. And as he's doing this, he actually traveled around the country, you know, on foot, in silence, gained a PhD. It's explained, you know, how he did that, everything. And it's just really cool seeing how he's able to like meet lots of different people and communicate with them in different ways, and just kind of their interactions are very charming. I don't even know how to explain. Like, you have to almost read, like, it's almost like kind of like unbelievable. It literally is like unbelievable. Like, I don't know how I'd never heard of him before, like picking this book up, but definitely pick it up. I'm not very good at explaining this one. Just really, really well done. Just kind of his like peaceful resistance and kind of just like learning about the world and learning about people around him with like his like, you know, just walking in silence. Just really well done. Highly enjoyed it. Definitely. I think a lot of people will too as well. Now, going on to September, we got 2 left, and this one is going to be Below the Edge of Darkness by Edith Witter. And this is all about a scientist who wanted to study phosphorescence, or, you know, or bioluminescence, and like, you know, things that glow underwater and whatnot. And this was kind of like a sort of like a memoir and a science book combined, dealing with, obviously, you know, we're talking about like, you know, the deep ocean here. So there's a lot of really cool just like science facts about the ocean, you know, the kind of like the pelagic, hydropelagic zones and things like that. But it was also really like, she kind of gets into the nuts and bolts of how you actually get down there and start diving and checking things out and in the submersibles and stuff. And, you know, we're talking about like in the 80s, 90s, for a lot of it, kind of dealing with very, you know, this is pretty sketchy stuff. Like, she's, you know, in one of these submersibles and starts filling up with water. And I'm thinking, you know, yeah, I don't know, you cannot be claustrophobic doing that sort of stuff. And I thought it was really cool just like learning about like how it's actually like approaching, how you actually get going on doing this sort of stuff. And like, just for example, like one of the vignettes is when she's trying to work with like a kind of a documentary. Her scientific team is like doing stuff off the coast of Cuba, and she got to like, Fidel Castro was like on her boat and stuff, which I thought was like pretty interesting. And she got to like meet him for like a little bit, and how he was like interested in like the deep ocean water, like kind of like life and science and stuff. So I thought that was like, she's got a lot of cool like just like personal stories that are interwoven into the books, or excuse me, into the book. But like I said, it's just a really good blending of science and memoir. I think a lot of scientists that should like take note on that. Like, science memoirs just are really, really, really good. Definitely check this one out if that interests you. And lastly, for a book that I finished about a week ago, I had to write this one down because it's like the longest subtitle ever. Not really, but Dark Archives, a librarian's investigation into the science and history of books bound in human skin, also known as anthropogenic bibliophagy. That's a mouthful right there, by Megan Rosenblum. And I honestly just picked it up because who doesn't want to read a book about books, you know, bound in human skin, I guess. But anyways, apparently there's actually quite a few. There's about 50 or 60 known like confirmed examples of, you know, books that are in human leather and stuff. But what's cool about this is, besides just the, you know, just the macabre and unique like subject matter, is the author definitely deals really well kind of researching kind of the history of the different like categories of why these books were created. A lot of them were like not for medical reasons, but medical professionals for a couple various different reasons decided, you know, this was like a good idea, and kind of going off on like, you know, should we like, how do I even explain? She deals really well with sort of the ethics of a lot of the situations, because if a museum or a library owns this and is bound in human skin, at what point should, like, you know, you treat the human skin as like part of like a corpse or whatever, and should be like treated respectfully, whether that's through a cremation or burial or whatever, with like the rest of the body and sort of things like that. Some of the other categories, you know, a lot of criminals apparently had their skin bound into like book covers and things, sort of as a way, almost as like a token to like kind of, you know, get back at the criminal and whatnot, you know, kind of dealing with all this kind of crazy stuff, and like all the litigation and like lawsuits that have started like happen, like now that people like realize that's kind of like around. But she definitely deals, I think, like, she's got a really cool like perspective on things, as being sort of a deaf advocate, but also like a super professional librarian as well. It's just, I don't know, it's just a bizarre, interesting, quirky book. If books bound in human skin sound like something you want to read, definitely check out Dark Archives. Alright, so there you have it. Those were 10 books that I've read throughout the year that I just really enjoyed that were nonfiction titles. Let me know down in the comments below what some of your favorite nonfiction reads of 2021 have been so far, and if any of these books sound interesting to you. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to check out my link tree. All the stuff's in there. And whatever you end up reading the rest of the year, read victoriously.